seconds and counting. 25 seconds and counting. We are still go. 20 seconds. Guidance alert. The guidance system now going internal. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good morning to many of you in the Western Hemisphere. Good afternoon to the rest, and good evening to my viewers in Europe and Africa. Good very early morning to folks in the Pacific Rim, and welcome to the Angry Astronaut. Those of you who have joined me right now are part of a small crowd, group of supporters who are taking advantage of these this live stream opportunity so that we can have a sort of a dynamic experience, sort of a dynamic conversation about UFOs. Some of the most famous UFO cases in history is what we'll be discussing, amongst other things. I'm sure there'll be other things we can talk about. And once again, definitely want to make a regular practice of doing this, something that I used to do, don't do as often, and need to get back into the habit of that, as a thank you to all of you folks for supporting this channel. You guys make all of this possible, because there's no way that I would be able to do the things that I do on this channel if it wasn't for all of you. So thanks very much. And if you are not a Patreon supporter, not a member, and are watching this, you are watching a recorded version of it. And if you would like to participate, it's a very cheap thing to do, $3 a month. Very, very inexpensive to participate as a Patreon supporter. All the links are in the description for that. Okay, enough self-promotion. Feel free, by the way, to let me know where you're checking in from. We have a variety of different ways to comment. It can either be for those of you who are YouTube members, you can do that in the chat, or there's also the live stream Q&A. Where that can be done in the Discord server, or you can just talk to me. There are the number of people who have joined me in the Discord live. We have 4 Marks, UK. Anton, thank you so much for the $5. Really do appreciate that. Once again, I wouldn't be moving to Europe if it wasn't for you folks also. And I'll be bringing you some very interesting stuff. The first of these events, actually, that I've arranged or has come about is in Ireland. They are trying to get a very big antenna that's going to be every bit as powerful as a lot of the antennas that are used in the NASA Deep Space Network. They've been wanting to make that operational for some time, and they want me to be involved in their fundraising efforts. So I'll be heading over to Cork County in Ireland at the National Space Center there, probably a couple of weeks after I show up. So we got Florida. Hello, and thank you so much. Really do appreciate that for checking in. And then, of course, Andy near Guildford, just outside of London. Really do appreciate you joining me here. Let's see. I'm going to check the live stream real quick. Live stream Q&A is where you can make your comments if you want to do so on the Discord side of things. And don't see any. Oh, there we go. Let's see what we got here. These comments up. This live stream Q&A active. Yes, indeed it is. A lot of questions coming across. Okay, so in any event, we have, yes, live stream Q&A again to answer your question that also is active. So I think one of the first things that I wanted to talk about is a very famous event that took place in New Mexico. A police officer was in pursuit of a speeder, essentially. And while all of that was happening, he observed something, or rather, observed something strange. What it looked to be like a fire or explosions or something along those lines happening. And so he thought that something serious was going on over there, and so he diverted he abandoned the pursuit of the speeder and went to where he thought he saw the explosions. And there he saw this strange egg shaped, I guess would be a best way to describe it, this white egg shaped craft sitting on landing legs with a few smallish individuals in white coveralls and maybe a space helmet, that sort of thing, around it. And he started to approach them, not knowing exactly what was going on with all of that. And then as he approached, there was suddenly another explosion, some sort of gout of flame, something, and that it really frightened him, the noise that he heard. And then after that, he retreated back to his car, and the craft took to the air, and he took off. Got his fellow police officers. They went back to the location, and they found physical evidence of the craft being there. They found some smoldering foliage, some indentations in the ground where the landing legs that he described were. So what this was is one of these few occasions, these few documented cases of what was in those days called a close encounter of the third kind. For those of you who aren't familiar with how all of that works, close encounters of the first kind is when you simply observe a UFO. Close encounters of the second kind is when the UFO leaves some sort of physical evidence of it having been there. And close encounter of the third kind is when you see aliens of some kind. So the reason why this particular case is so famous is because Project Blue Book, the U.S. Air Force, came out to investigate the case. And in their opinion, the witnesses were very credible, especially Officer Zamora himself. And so they found that to be, and at the end of their investigation, they came to the conclusion that they had no explanation for what took place. And again, this was a little unusual for Project Blue Book because at the end of their investigations, they concluded that really there was nothing to the whole UFO story, that that there was nothing all that significant, nothing to see here, nothing that the government really needed to invest any further time or money in, etc. But this case with Officer Zamora was always regarded as being a very interesting one, and again, one of these rare cases where the UFO left physical evidence of it having been there, which was photographed and observed by other police officers who arrived on the scene. Again, those sorts of things are not terribly common. So, and this is just one of a number of things. I'm just curious, what the rest of you may have heard about this particular incident. Some people call it another Roswell. It happened in the 1950s, very long time ago. So it was a very interesting case, and one that continues to fascinate ufologists. There have been quite a number of explanations that have been put forward ever since then. So I'd be interested to see what a lot of you might have to think about that one. But it is an interesting case indeed. I see that Darth is typing a comment here, and once again, he lived in this region. And what is one thing that's interesting about this case is the fact that the White Sands test range was not very far away, approximately 15 miles or so away from the area. And there was a lunar lander, a series of lunar lander experiments that were going on at the time. And so as a result, some people concluded that this may have been some sort of a pathfinder for a lunar lander test article. And of course, if you had technicians who had come out to find the craft, if it had gone off course or something, of course they would have been in white coveralls. And who knows, they might have been wearing helmets as well if the craft had some sort of toxic fuel on board. And if it was a highly secretive project of some kind, then it's something that never would have come to light. That is one potential explanation that's been put forward on this. Another explanation, and this was put forward by an extremely active skeptic and UFO debunker, he feels that the whole thing was a hoax. And he came up with some very compelling ways as to how the whole thing could have been faked. John Morgan says, I want to believe, however, I want to see proof. I'm pretty sure life is out there. Oh, thank you, Darth. Once again, I'm sorry. I mistakenly said 1950s. So it's 1960s. 1964, actually. I don't think anyone challenged the veracity of his observations. It was a leap from what he observed from being a UFO is the part that he didn't agree with when I knew him from the 80s and 90s. I think his opinion changed over time, especially when what was happening at White Sands became better known. Yeah, it could have been a craft of some kind that was under experimentation at the time. If that is indeed the case, of course, then, whatever was being experimented with was so secretive that whoever was involved took, their secrets to the grave with them, that there had to have been some sort of conspiracy to cover up this experimental craft that they were messing around with, and whatever it is was so secretive that they could never declassify the event. Not only that, the Air Force were either complicit in the cover-up during the Project Blue Book investigation, or they just didn't know about it. Those are that all theoretically possible. But once again, in my opinion, an experimental craft that went 15 miles off course outside of the White Sands test range, and then was that thoroughly covered up over all that time, again, in my view, kind of takes a leap of faith that whatever happened had to be so secretive that, it could never be declassified. We were never told. In places like Utah, pathfinders for Mars landers were tested in the 1960s. And yes, indeed, maybe that is, what we were looking at. And it looks like, yeah, and please forgive me, I'm flipping back and forth between live stream Q&A and the YouTube chat. Thanks very much. Anton Nim has a number of things that he said about all of this. I worked at the UFO Museum for 2 years while researching my book. A lot of visitors told me about their experiences. Often they had witnesses with them, very credible stuff. Just about everybody who told me about the sighting also experienced friends, families, strangers trying to tell them what they saw. It's very odd for someone who wasn't there to try to tell you, the experiencer, what it was that you saw. Oh, that was ball lightning, etc. And then Andy says even that would be remarkable. Meteorologists still don't accept that ball lightning is real. Yeah, that is something that is still very much under dispute right now. Just 1 second here, and I want to, I'm forgetting this fellow's name. Yeah, his last name is Klass, Klass. He is one of the more Philip Klass, UFOs Explained. Really good book, by the way. I got it. I bought it in the 1980s. And he had a lot of UFO cases, very famous ones that he explained, or at least attempted to explain. He visited that particular site years, of course, after the event took place. And he was convinced that it was a hoax cooked up by Officer Zamora and also by the local government to try to get tourism into the area, because that region was really struggling economically in the 1960s. Ever since that time, this particular location has become a bit of a ufologist mecca. because it is such a famous case. Once again, that explanation also, in my opinion, takes a leap of faith, because we're assuming that everybody who was involved in this conspiracy, which would have had to have involved several members of law enforcement, not just one, all of these people took their secrets to the grave. And also, when Project Blue Book and these Air Force investigators came out to check the story out, obviously it would have been in their interest to lie about this if this was some sort of hoax that they had cooked up, but they would have had to have kept their stories very, very consistent in order to fool the Air Force investigators. Would a local government and a few members of local law enforcement be that good at maintaining consistent stories and concealing all of that for this long? In the case of Officer Zamora, taking that secret to his grave when he died a little over a decade ago. Again, I think that takes a bit of a leap of faith there, every bit as big as some of the leaps of faith that ufologists would ask us to take when they talk about government conspiracies to cover up genuine UFOs. Again, it's an interesting. By the way, if you'd like to make comments, just talk to me. I can see that we have 5 people with me, or 6 people with me actually, on Discord. Feel free to just say something about this if you have a comment to make. Yeah. My producer believes that most of what is being seen here are experimental craft of some kind. That we may be more advanced technologically with the experimental craft that we have at our disposal than a lot of people might think. And sure, I acknowledge that as being a viable possibility as much as anything else. I Some of these experiences, man, it seems like these craft have capabilities far beyond what our experimental aerospace would be capable of producing. But once again, who knows? I'm certainly not involved in that in a project like that, so it's very difficult to say. Once again, just feel free to make comments on the chat if you are if you're a YouTube member, or I am also checking the Discord. I think have people commenting there as well. Darth Russ says in 1964, Socorro in New Mexico, which is where this incident took place, had a population between 1,000 and 1,500 people and was a relatively isolated community. And to this day, operates on a very tiny town, everyone knows everyone mechanic. The idea that there was a conspiracy of more than 1 or 2 people around the Zamora incident doesn't pass the giggle test. Well, Darth, I take your word on that one, definitely. You're more familiar with that region of New Mexico, I think, than any of us are. And yeah, it makes sense to me. It seems so unlikely that we would have had a group of members of local government and law enforcement conspiring to come up with some kind of story to stimulate local economy that nobody in that little town ever found out about or was ever willing to talk about. Once again, I think that takes a leap of faith every bit as big as the people who say that the government is covering up UFOs, has aliens concealed somewhere in a hidden bunker, those sorts of things. I think it doesn't pass the bullshit test very much. So by the way, guys, feel free to make sure that you like this broadcast. I know there aren't too many of us here right now. For those of us who are going to be watching the recorded broadcast, please make sure that you like this and subscribe. Let's go ahead. I'm just going to check to see if we have any other comments about this before I move on to the next famous incident. Okay, Don's Folly. What motivation would the government have for disclosure? Yeah, not much. I would say that the government, that given the problems that disclosure might cause, there isn't a whole lot of incentive aside from the fact that the people are demanding it under the Freedom of Information Act. And the longer that you try to hide those things, the worse the long-term consequences might be. But still, yeah, it's very much in the interest, I think, of the government, if they are aware of the fact that there is some sort of alien presence here on Earth, to keep that hidden. Because I often say that if people know that these things are definitely here, and they also know that it's quite possible that they're abducting people from time to time, then it's very likely that they're going to open fire the moment they see one. And of course, when they open fire on alien visitors, they could trigger an interplanetary war and the end of human civilization. That alone is a pretty big reason to try to hide this. Andy Law says if some of these craft are able to manipulate inertia, such as anti-gravity, ridiculous feats of acceleration, through some kind of warping space, we might expect to see odd effects such as a difference in the appearance of size of craft from real size, difference in energy emissions, reflections from the expected. We also might assume that they may have warped from here, but from a parallel universe, no need to have traveled from other star systems. Yeah, Andy, I mean, a lot of people talk about warp drive as being a theoretical explanation for how they do the things that they do. However, I also think simply, as I've mentioned before in my videos, simply manipulating the Earth's magnetic field and using that as a form of propulsion could achieve some of the same things that we've seen. The Earth's magnetic field is a very powerful thing. And if you had a powerful enough reactor and good enough superconductors, far superior to the superconductors we have right now, in theory, you could have, craft that achieve the types of things we've been seeing. That is, of course, assuming that there's nothing alive inside of them. The kind of G forces that they've experienced would crush or splatter any pilot all over the inside of the craft. But who's to say that there's anything alive in them? It could be completely automated. Darth says in 2012, when Socorro put the Zamora mural up on a culvert after he died, it was obvious pandering for tourism. Yeah, I mean, I myself might like to visit it, to be honest. When it occurred, I doubt the local rancher dominated government wouldn't likely to be capable of such a sophisticated stunt. Zamora wasn't a close friend or anything, but towards the end of his life, he thought that he saw something esoteric that escaped from white sand somehow. Maybe so. Maybe so indeed. I'm going back to the comments here. I think we have a couple more from Anton Nim. In 1964, my mother was on the way home from her mother's house in Marietta, Georgia. She came to the high school where the several cars were pulled over, observing a large disc hovering 75 feet above the field. She said it wasn't just hovering, it was more like locked in place. It stayed that way for about 5 minutes and then zipped up and out of sight, going vertically so fast that you couldn't follow it with your eyes, and yet it didn't even make an updraft to rustle the leaves on trees nearby, which means they can move through the air without creating a pressure wave. Yeah, that's interesting. It explains why we've never observed one to make a sonic boom, technology that we don't have. And yeah, anything that's moving and utilizing the electromagnetic fields and that sort of thing of the Earth, it would certainly produce a sonic boom in the process of moving. It's all very curious indeed. Now, again, to an observer, it's sometimes, what they might think is going supersonic. It may not be. A sudden acceleration, say from 0 to 600 miles per hour, might not create the same kind of pressure wave, etc. But yeah, I mean, it would be wonderful to see more speculation on this, to see more scientific analysis of what was observed and what theoretically could have created such effects. What sort of technology could have created what we've observed. Unfortunately, what happens is instead the scientific community simply dismisses the whole thing, laughs at it, says that these, are kooks or liars, etc., and that's the end of the discussion. And it just does it such a tremendous disservice to the entire discipline. Carl Themmel says if there were extra solar technology, major corporations would hate any technology that would be disruptive. Conspiracies usually involve money. Conspiracies involving lots of money, and so lots of people are hard to keep from leaking out. Yeah, if you have, again, if you have thousands of people involved in a conspiracy, as I've often said, that's a difficult thing to keep covered up, especially for many decades. Not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying I have a harder time accepting those sorts of scenarios. What I tend to believe, at least at this point, what is kind of along the lines of what Avi Loeb has been talking about, that we've been seeing probes of some kind, dandelion seeds, as he calls them, unmanned craft that had nothing to do with our civilization, that they're uninterested in us. And the only reason that they are checking us out is because they were programmed to, but they weren't expecting to find a civilization here. They were only supposed to check out anything that was in the Goldilocks zone of any particular star system. Just got a battery low thing on my earbud again. I may have to swap it out to another one. I'll let you guys know. Does anyone want to make a comment? We have a lot of people who have joined me here. Would anybody like to have a comment to make audibly? If so, feel free to unmute yourself. I'm afraid I don't know enough about it. I wish I could say more about that. That question was about element 115, and there are so many things I actually don't know about all this. For those of you who have been watching my channel for a long time, UFOs are something that I never even really touched on for the most part. I focused mostly on astronomical observations like Oumuamua, like Tabby Star, the sorts of things that we have a lot of tangible information about. And a great deal of scientific study has been done about these subjects, and I shied away from UFOs because so much of that was based on anecdotal information, which I never regarded, even though it may very well be true. I'm not saying anecdotal information isn't true. It's just not sufficient for me to cover it. That's how I used to think. But now that I've gotten a lot more information lately, especially with this testimony in Congress, et cetera, that's when my position started to change on all of this. And that's when I became more interested in these anecdotal stories. But yeah, to be clear, and I think a lot of people who have been commenting on my channel are aware of this, I really don't know a lot about UFOs. And this is something that has, attracted people's attention. I'm kind of like the skeptic who is no longer so much of a skeptic anymore. So I have a lot to learn about the topic, and I'll tell you what I've learned up to this point is fascinating indeed. But now that you mentioned it, I will definitely research it a lot more thoroughly. Oh, go right ahead, producer. Right. Okay, so isotope, can you tell me isotope 115, is that an atomic number? Is that what we're talking about there? And what's the name of it? Is it just element 115 or is it called something else? Muscove. Okay, right. I'm familiar with that. Okay. So element 115, we got a little bit of explanation here, is an element called muscovium, something that we only apparently became aware of fairly recently. But apparently, Bob Lazar, who's told quite a bit, quite a number of tales about UFOs in his time, he talked about working with this muscovium element 115 at Roswell, apparently quite some time ago. Okay, so an anti-gravity, an element that enables anti-gravity or something. I'd like to read more about it. Before, boy, I'll tell you, the time has been getting away from us here. I'd like to really quick bring up the Phoenix Lights incident, 1990s. This is another. There are so many famous cases. We could go on and on and on forever today. Let me tell you. But the Phoenix Lights incident is something else I really wanted to bring up because it's something that I was more personally familiar with simply because I was alive at the time and I was following the case. Um, many thousands of people observed these lights moving through the sky, through the Phoenix sky, under very mysterious circumstances. Now, according to quite a number of the witnesses involved, they said that these lights moved in a V shape because they were attached to a colossal V shaped craft. Now, by colossal, we're talking the size of a couple of football fields. Huge craft that were moving through the night skies of Phoenix. Once again, not everybody said that that is what they saw. Unfortunately, the home video technology of the time, the video camera technology of the time, VHS cameras, etc., were not very good, especially when we're talking about low light enhancement, that sort of thing. And so, it's very difficult to determine exactly what the lights moving through the night skies of Phoenix really were associated with. Were they just a bunch of lights, or were they attached to something physical, something large? We have no photographic evidence to confirm that. Had that incident taken place now, then there would have been much better imagery of what was happening. And some people who talk about UFOs, who are engaged, ufologists essentially say it's only a matter of time before something like this happens again in our time. And when it does happen, and you have thousands and thousands of smartphones, some of which have low light enhancement and really good. I mean, my smartphone has the best camera on the market. It's amazing things at night. By the way, I'm going to need to connect my other earbud. But if and when this happens again, we're going to see we're going to have a lot of people who are going to be really frightened by what they observe. But in the aftermath of what occurred with Phoenix Lights, there's a lot of people who wanted to know what the hell was going on. And the governor of Arizona at the time, he had a press conference, and he said, well, we found the culprit. And a fellow in an alien outfit, and your classic big head, gray eyes, all that kind of crap, comes walking out into the crowd. Everybody has a good laugh, and that's pretty much the end of it, which got a lot of the witnesses really angry. They really felt that the government was not taking them seriously at all. And what is interesting to note is that very same governor, after he was no longer in office, apologized on camera during an interview and said that he saw precisely the same thing that all of these other witnesses saw: the big V-shaped craft, all of that. He said he saw that very same thing. And the reason he came up with that big public joke was because people were so frightened. They were afraid of, an Independence Day kind of an alien invasion coming or something like that. He had to do something to try to calm people down. He wasn't getting any sort of direction from the federal government as to what he should do. They weren't talking. So he just did that. And he regrets to this day having done it. So I'm just curious. I'm wondering if anybody that's on this conversation actually saw the Phoenix Lights, or if they know anybody who did see them. I'd be very interested. Okay, here's Darth Rust has to say, I'm pretty sure that the explanation of the Phoenix Lights were IR flares from an A-10 on a training mission, pretty well substantiated. I don't know if there are interviews with the pilot or not. Now, there is, one of the things, because I've seen this explanation before, there are quite a number of witnesses who were very familiar with these types of flares. A lot of the witnesses who saw these things, who say they saw the big V-shaped craft, etc., were Air Force people who had a good deal of familiarity with the types of flares that we use, and they say, with a great deal of confidence, that that is not what they saw. But then on the other side of the equation, yeah, it seems like a very viable and logical explanation. Um, the Phoenix Lights, by the way, it was a very, very lengthy um, experience, a lengthy incident. And yeah, to my knowledge, anyway, from all the reading that I've done about it, it's never been officially debunked. It's never been officially explained. And as I say, even the governor of Arizona claims, anyway, to have seen something very unusual that night. Let's see, what do we have here as well? The flares don't fit the observations because the thing stayed airborne for hours, says Anton Nim, and followed the highway in the same tight formation. Anton, by the way, I'd love to actually talk to you a little bit more in depth offline at some point, if you could email me and such, because I really get the impression that you know a lot about this subject. Okay, so in any event, at some point, I'd love to talk to you directly, because I think you know a lot more about this topic than I do. And given the fact that my videos are drifting in this direction, I'm releasing a fair number about them. Let's talk at some point. That's all I'm saying. Let's have a talk about this at some point. Okay, we've gone a bit over time, but nevertheless, I would love to hear a couple. If any of you guys have any of your own experiences, I'd love to give you an opportunity to share them with me right now. If any of you have anything you'd like to say, anything you'd like to post, Antonym has already posted his. I've never seen a UFO. I've never seen anything in the sky that I couldn't explain. So I'm just and I'm a bit envious of people who have, although I've heard it can be a very frightening experience sometimes too. Carl Thamel says, I saw the video with the guy in alien disguise and the later apology of the former governor. Yeah, it was a big story for a little while, but then nobody ever made a big deal about it afterwards. Even the current testimony, even these things that, in conjunction with all the testimony we've been hearing in Congress today, there are no discussions of the Phoenix Lights, which is a weird thing indeed. But yeah, if any of you have any experiences you'd like to share with me, now's the time. If not, that's cool. But just in case anybody has ever seen anything strange, I'd love to hear from you. And in the meantime, like I say, I'll go ahead and get ready to wrap up the topic today. For those of you, a quick reminder for those of you who have seen my CIA video, there's a lot of interesting declassified stories on the CIA website that I would like to share in greater detail with all of you. I'm not sure if all of you have seen that video yet, but if you haven't, I've got that. I'll have that linked in the description afterwards for everybody, including those who are watching the recorded version of it. Again, that was a really weird situation too, and perhaps an example of what might happen if you actually successfully shot down a UFO. And how they might react to that. And according to the story, according to the CIA report, the Russians did manage to shoot down a UFO that was passing over a military exercise, and the reaction was pretty damned awful. I just want to make sure that there's, we may have another comment real quick. Great documentary, says Anton Nim, about called Out of the Blue. has something about the Phoenix Lights apparently. And yeah, I saw some other very interesting cases. By the way, some of the most famous photographs that to me look like some sort of pot lid thrown through the air or something like that. A lot of those were very thoroughly investigated by Project Blue Book as well. They found the witnesses to be credible, witnesses who never made a dime off of any of their experiences. And they've held up to this day. And the list goes on and on about so many of them. But one thing I'm going to do, and one thing that I will close with real quick here. Well, actually, there's another quick comment I want to make sure to share. I've seen a black triangle shaped craft in the early 2014, completely silent, had a glowing red light in the center of the triangle. They're prevalent in the 1990s and 2000s, especially in South Texas, according to Antonym. Again, he's talking about out of the blue. Isn't so much about the Phoenix Lights, but the phenomenon in general. The triangle craft was black and completely smooth was that particular experience. Thank you for sharing that with me. Really do appreciate that. Really interesting stuff. Let me, however, share one of my favorite UFO experiences. This one, by the way, was a hoax. And it was shared in Philip Klass's book, UFOs Explained, which I talked about earlier. There was an incident that took place again with physical evidence, this huge scorch mark left behind by a UFO that took off. The observer said that he saw aliens, the same kind of situation as the Socorro incident in New Mexico, very similar to that. And Philip Klass, being extremely involved in UFO investigations at the time, mostly because he wanted to debunk them, but he flew out to this location shortly after he heard about it happening. He had an opportunity to meet the person who said that he saw the UFO, a very respected and well-liked person in the community, a very likable person, a very charismatic person. Philip Klass admits that he personally liked this guy. He said that he was very fond of him and spent some very good times with him. However, he discovered that he most definitely faked the whole thing. The way it was done, Mr. Klass went out, Dr. Klass actually, went out to this scorch mark where the UFO allegedly was, and he found the charred remnants of a match in the middle of it, and then 3 more matches, again, charred almost beyond recognition, virtually no remnants left, but he still found them at the edge of the scorch mark. And he conducted an experiment himself with a puddle of gasoline and threw a match directly into the middle of it. The match goes out. It's extinguished, as much as people don't like to believe, was extinguished by the and I'm almost at the end of this, by the way, extinguished by the gasoline. And then he put the match at the edge of the pool of the gasoline and ignited it. He was able, of course, to very realistically recreate what was done, which was obviously a puddle of gasoline, which the guy tried to ignite with a match in the middle of it, and then it put a larger flame with 3 matches at the edge of it, ignited it, and created this scorch mark and, the basis for his hoax. And again, Dr. Klass had a hard time admitting to himself that this guy had been lying the whole time because he was so well respected and because he was such a likable person. But that is indeed what happened. And it's just something that we definitely need to keep in mind anytime that we're looking at any of these cases, that anybody can perpetrate a hoax, for a laugh or for whatever reasons. And sometimes it might not be the kind of person that you would expect. Want to really quick make sure that I catch up on any other comments that might have been made. Something else happened. Klass is well known as a debunker, calls himself the bad astronomer. Yes, indeed. And then this happened in Dansville, by the way, the triangle experiment. There are hoaxes out there, says Antonym. Yeah, there's bunches of them. There are those that want to muddy the waters, and it's unfortunate, but definitely true. And given the fact that CGI has become so good lately, it becomes very, very difficult indeed to determine whether or not any photographic information that we get is valid or not either. All right. So I want to go ahead and wrap things up, and to thank everybody for contributing to this conversation, and also thank all of you for contributing to this channel, because there's no way I'd be able to do the things that I do without your help. And if you're watching a recorded version of this and you want to participate in our next discussion, it's all in the description. It's a very inexpensive thing to do, and we would love you to be part of our Discord community. So until next time, guys, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.